Hey everybody. This is just a brief obituary for Bruno Rizzi by Antonio Carlo and Umberto Melotti. It's from shit. I don't know what year it's from. Um, Wait, maybe I have it here. Yeah, 1977 in Telos. Um, January 13th, Bruno Rizzi died in Busalengo, Italy, at the age of 75. Except for a brief note by Giorgio Galli in Monde Operaio, which I'm assuming means workers' world. Um, Not sure. His death has gone unnoticed. Rizzi, as Galli noted, was an author ignored and quote cursed end quote. Rizzi's work on the USSR, Le bureaucratisation, the bureaucratization of the world. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the French. Was discussed worldwide within the left opposition from the early 1940s on, but direct knowledge of Rizzi's contribution has remained limited to a restricted circle of scholars and militants. Rizzi's debate with Trotsky is almost always mentioned as something that one has heard of. Few know that the Bruno R., to whom the great Russian revolutionary frequently refers in his last lectures, later collected in the volume entitled In Defense of Marxism, is in fact Rizzi. Moreover, Rizzi was considered an able interlocutor not only by Brodsky, but by Schachtman, Kendall, Deutscher, and Pierre Neville as well. Rizzi was abundantly plagiarized by Burnham in a sociological bestseller of the 1940s, by far inferior to Rizzi's text, and was the only Italian author included in an anthology on Marxism published in Paris in 1970. Um, I have a piece coming out that's called The Myth of Bruno R. That's from the book Neither Socialism Nor Capitalism, Theories of Bureaucratic Collectivism, edited by Howard Kern and Lippow, um, that um, would dispute the influence of Rizzi um, on such thinkers. Particularly, I think it'd say that as well of Burnham, um, who in 1940 would have been, oh no, never mind. Well, not never mind, but I was going to say something else. Never mind to what I didn't say. Why has there been the silence concerning Rizzi? Traditional closed Italian academic culture. Rizzi was not a professor, a journalist, or a lawyer, but earned his living selling shoes, is not unrelated to this, but is certainly not the main factor. The fact is that, already in the 1930s, Rizzi was questioning the socialist character of the USSR, which in his view represented the first manifestation of a particular type of class society, different from capitalism, and according to him, destined to spread worldwide, bureaucratic collectivism. That placed Rizzi against the whole organized labor movement at the time, whether communist or social democratic, including the most consistent left opposition, i.e., the Trotskyists, who were still kidding themselves about the socialist character, albeit distorted, of the USSR. Alone against everyone, Rizzi corroborated Erasmus's bitter realization, according to which the truth should not be told if the truth cannot be accepted. The same fate as that thinker, however, would befall Rizzi, to conquer after his death. Of course, there is no lack of limitations and errors, even serious ones, in Rizzi. In particular, he lacked the ability to move beyond intuitions to the level of coherent and systematic scientific analysis. Thus, Rizzi came to defend generic equivalences between Stalinism, fascism, Nazism, and Roosevelt's New Deal. In the latter part of his life, he even got to the point of considering the USSR a feudal country, although in an annotated edition of his book, entrusted to us for an eventual second edition, Rizzi asked us not to publish those two chapters of the second part in which such a definition appears. Um, the authorities in France banned Rizzi's book for because it was contained very anti-Semitic passages. Um, that's just a side note for me. That hasn't been mentioned yet, but I feel like I should mention it. Nevertheless, it was certainly not because of his limitations and errors that a certain silence fell over him. Nothing is said about Rizzi precisely because of his merits. Even after Stalin's death, which was not the end of Stalinism, the labor movement is far from openly confronting the problem of the social nature of the USSR. Above all, in order to be acceptable within the democratic bourgeois framework, the Italian Communist Party finds itself tactically mediating two contradictory requirements: the recognition of the autonomy of the USSR and the necessity of some alliance or friendship, even if among equals, with that state and its ruling party, so as not to remain isolated in the certainly not improbable case of growing U.S. interference in Italy. The mediation has resulted in a criticism of individual acts of Soviet power, as qualified as, quote, errors, end quote, even serious errors, e.g., the invasion of Czechoslovakia, without reaching the point where the system, considered socialist, is called into question, even when, due to, quote, error, end quote, it invades a sister country, puts forth theories of limited sovereignty, represses strikes and dissent, etc. In this context, there is no room for Rizzi's radical and ruthless analysis, not even as a point of departure for criticism. The conspiracy of silence is better. Furthermore, Rizzi's position, in underlining the class character of Soviet bureaucracy, could be contagious for the Western proletariat. Even in Western Europe, the communist parties, although if in a quite different form than the USSR and the other East European countries, at least to the extent that they do not represent, at least for the time being, the dominant class, are structured as bureaucratized institutions frequently choking off the masses' autonomous initiative. It is no accident that the Italian Communist Party's stance is critical of the Soviet leadership in the Sakharov case, a prominent figure seeking a Western-type democratization of the USSR. While it is almost indifferent or openly hostile to the Polish workers who march in the streets against the bureaucracy, or the poet-worker Horazzi, arrested for having put forth a radical criticism of the system. 1 second. Andrei Dmitrievich Sakharov was a Soviet physicist and a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, which he was awarded in 1975 for emphasizing human rights around the world. Although Sakharov spent his career in physics in the Soviet program of nuclear weapons, overseeing the development of thermonuclear weapons, Sakharov also did fundamental work in understanding particle physics, magnetism, and physical cosmology. Sakharov is mostly known for his political activism for individual freedom, human rights, civil liberties, and reforms in the Soviet Union. For which he was deemed a dissident and faced persecution from the Soviet establishment. In his memory, the Sakharov Prize was established and is awarded annually by the European Parliament for people and organizations dedicated to human rights and freedoms. So, that's what Sakharov is. I didn't know that. I think I actually did know I think I was familiar with a figure such as him, and I didn't know his name. Yes, and it says poet worker Horazzi. I don't know if this is. Yeah, so Miklos Horaszty is a Hungarian politician, writer, and journalist, human rights advocate, and university professor. He served the maximum of 2 terms as the OSCE representative on freedom of the media from 2004 to 2010, Currently, he is adjunct professor at the School of International and Public Affairs of Columbia Law School, New York, and visiting professor at the Central European University CEU Department of Public Policy. Yeah, so it says here, Harasti studied philosophy and literature at Budapest University during the late 1960s. He belonged to an underground left-wing student organization that opposed the ruling Hungarian Socialist Workers' Party and was in contact with the Chinese embassy in Budapest. In 1976, he co-founded the Hungarian Democratic Opposition Movement, and in 1980 he became editor of the Samizdat periodical Beszélő. It says Haraszti participated in the roundtable negotiations on transition to free elections, a member of the Hungarian parliament from 1990 to 1994. He then moved on to lecture on democratization and media politics at numerous universities. Harasti's books include A Worker in a Worker State and The Velvet Prison, both of which have been translated into several languages. In 2012, Harasti was appointed UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Belarus. Okay, those are. I didn't know who these references were to. The idea for the Italian Communist Party is a voluntaristic Western type, quote, democratization, end quote, possibly gradual and painless, directed from above and managed by the same parties in power in the individual Eastern countries, and not a socialist and workers' revolution overturning the power and privileges of the, quote, new class, end quote. I think that you generally refer to people that have that kind of like democratization from above in the USSR and the Eastern Bloc as reform communists, which would be distinct from most of Trotskyism, with the exception, I would say that's why people refer to like Isaac Deutscher as like an apologist, at least partially. One of the reasons why they do so is because he condemned like the East German workers' uprising in 1953 as like the workers as like basically saying that like the post-Stalin the era in the immediate wake of Stalin's death was going into a liberalization phase, and the direct self-activity of the East German workers was causing a reaction within the top of within the Soviet state. I'm not explaining this great, but basically, like if workers were just and the population of the Eastern Bloc were just submissive, there would be a democratization from above within the Soviet bloc. At least that's my understanding of it. So like that would be like an instance of like reform communism. And I think like Leo Kofler was kind of like that, and I think that would probably apply to like Lukács as well. Anyway, as far as the new left is concerned, it can be said that it has confronted the problem with even occasionally noteworthy contributions, e.g. those such as Lisa Foa. There's nothing for them. Eduardo Masi. I've never heard any of these names before. Have you? It says Eduardo Masi was an Italian sinologist, essayist, and translator, specialized in the culture of China and the Chinese language. And Enrica Carlotti Pichel. and it says Enrico Colatti Pichel was an Italian historian. There's no more information than that. Anyway, let me reread that sentence. Insofar as the New Left is concerned, it can be said that the New Left has confronted the problem with even occasionally noteworthy contributions, e.g. those of Lisa Foa, Eduardo Massi, Enrico Colotti Pichel, but it has tendentially succumbed to the Chinese theoretical positions, which, as is well known, speak of the restoration of capitalism in the USSR. Even here, the unadmitted necessity for a new point of international reference has resulted in the quite uncritical acceptance of fundamentally erroneous conceptions. Moreover, on the level of the youth movements, the theory of state capitalism comprises an easier position to accept, insofar as the theory of state capitalism does not presuppose the formulation of a new interpretive theoretical model, especially formulated so as to explain the nature of the new Russian society in its historical specificity. The equation industry plus exploitation equals capitalism lends itself to vulgarization more than the theory of bureaucratic collectivism. The Socialist Party has instead expressed since 1950 a position of overall dissent from the USSR, but its inability simultaneously to express a radical critique of class society as such. Precisely during the period of the Hungarian drama, the Italian Communist Party initiated a rediscovery of the, quote, values of bourgeois democracy, end quote, has precluded a serious analysis of the social nature of the USSR. What has prevailed, especially in the bleak years of the center-left and the social democratic unification, has been a substantial lack of interest in the problem and its instrumentalization in order to create difficulties for the Italian Communist Party. Also contributing to all this has been the custom of banally pragmatic and short-winded politics, deprived of an effective theoretical orientation, in which the horizon of the central committees frequently remained circumscribed around governmental crises and cabinet reshuffles. Bad times, then, for poor Rizzi. Nevertheless, it is not clear that this situation will continue. The game of tactical mediation is by now worn out, and a phase is looming in which the East and West, the ability for a radical critical analysis of present class society, will constitute an indispensable element of a politics directed towards surmounting the two repressive systems, afflicted by profound socio-economic crises. Rizzi could then be rediscovered with both his merits and limitations. This is a wish we make not only for the sake of old Bruno R., but also since such a change of focus would imply a qualitative leap for the whole left.